Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to a special edition of Hilaal Live. My name is Fahraaz Patel. I'll be in your company for the next 1 hour, but I'm not going to be alone. I'm going to be in the esteemed company of four gentlemen. We are going to be talking Islamic banking. Of course, tomorrow is the Banking Association of South Africa's Islamic Finance Conference that will be happening at the Kurtuba Conference Center. So we're going to be chatting various topics with regards to Islamic banking, and you are more than welcome to join in the conversation if you are joining us, of course, on DSTV channel 347, that is Hilaal TV. So let me introduce my panelists for today. And the discussion, of course, regarding Islamic banking, and it's been around now for 34 years in existence. And as a South African democracy, it is something that we can be truly proud of as we celebrate this milestone of Islamic finance. So let me introduce my guests. Joining us online, I have Shabir Chauhan from Al Baraka Bank. Shabir, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam, Faraz, and looking forward to being on your show.
Now, it's an absolute pleasure. Let me introduce my guests that are in studio. To my immediate left, I have Shaheen Suleiman from ABSA Islamic Banking. In the middle, I have Aman Muhammad. He is from FNB Islamic Banking. And to the extreme left of mine, I have Amin Hassan. He is the head of Sharia banking at Standard Bank. Gentlemen, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And jazakallah so much for joining us. I'm going to start off with you, Shabir. Of course, the last time this very same conference happened, it happened during mid-COVID. Let's talk about what are some of the objectives that were achieved from that last conference heading into this one that will be happening tomorrow morning.
It was very interesting. As you know, being part of the Islamic banking fraternity in South Africa, it's important that we create awareness of what's the industry all about and how we're progressing the industry. So the last conference that took place just created awareness of the Islamic landscape, the Sharia governance, also explaining some concepts to the people that participated, because it is a very misunderstood concept among Muslims and among people who are not of the Islamic faith. So I think we were quite successful. Yes, it was during the COVID period, it wasn't live. That did create some challenges, but we're now looking forward to actually making Islamic banking more known among the public in South Africa.
I want to come to you, Shaheen. There's always room for improvement, and I'm sure all three of you are heads of these various financial institutions want to improve on that. Looking ahead to tomorrow's conference, what are some of the points that when you walk out from Kurtuba, you can say, we are going to achieve it and we're going to achieve it effectively?
For us, I think, as Shabir mentioned, during COVID, it was very difficult with regards to the numbers of people that were able to attend the conference. So tomorrow, the invite is relatively open, and we have stakeholders across various industries coming through to the conference. If you look at the agenda, we discuss various topics. Sharia governance being the cornerstone of what we do on a daily basis is one of the topics for discussion. But we also speak about the milestones within the Islamic banking industry. We then touch on some of the topical issues in terms of how do we ensure financial inclusion, how do we cater for microfinance. So there's various range of topics that will be discussed today. And I think with the audience that's available and just the industry getting together, it's a great platform for us to brainstorm and think of great ideas when it comes to Islamic banking and Islamic finance.
Aman and Amin, I want to talk about awareness, because we were talking off air and we were having this discussion with regards to that awareness. How is there a creation of awareness, and that awareness which can be in the mind of the consumer who wants to get into Islamic banking and, most importantly, be part of that family?
For us, I think the word education is used interchangeably with awareness. And I've got an issue with that, because you cannot educate unless someone is aware. So platforms like this being on Hilaal TV tomorrow morning when we kick off the conference is to cement that awareness. And I think, like you correctly pointed out, the industry is nearly 34, 35 years old. We need to get into a position where we can start planting the seeds of a solid education where not just the Muslim consumer, but anyone who's interested, and I think this is, for me, probably one of the most important points, is that Islamic banking is not exclusively for Muslims.
Yes.
It should be viewed upon as a credible alternate to anyone who chooses it. And I think with platforms like this, with the conferences that we are now making an important event in the diary of everyone, not just the bankers. Shane spoke about the other stakeholders, the auditors, the lawyers, the regulators, the supervisors. They all are part of this ecosystem that we've now grown into what's known as Islamic banking, and not just the banking, but Islamic financial services as well. So this is a phenomenal opportunity where we can actually start looking at how we expand the awareness, but also start moving forward with the element of education. Because the industry that we are part of is not a static one. It's dynamic, it's continually changing and evolving.
I mean, the outcomes of the last conference, and I want to touch on what Aman has mentioned, education. How key is it when you walked out as the head of Sharia banking of Standard Bank, when you walked out of that last conference, okay, it was during COVID and all the negative assertions that happened from there. But if you could take the positivity and that positivity with regards to education, what would that be heading into the conference tomorrow morning?
Fahraaz, I think one of the key takeouts for me is one of the objectives we had at the first conference, as Shabir articulated, expanding on that, was consolidating the industry, understanding what the size in numerical terms of this industry actually is. And as you can see today, I think it's one of the very rare occasions that we're actually sitting together as an industry. So one of our largest objectives was consolidating the industry. And I think going into tomorrow's conference, one of the big takeouts that we can see in that consolidation is an organization that, or body, that we have spearheaded as an industry over the past few months now, which we're calling the Association of Islamic Financial Services Providers. And essentially what this is under the auspices of all of our lobbying bodies, the likes of BASA, the Banking Association, and ASISA for asset managers, we've brought in all of the participants of the financial services, not just banks, our asset managers, our insurers, our venture capital funds, our asset managers. And what we're starting to form is not just a siloed banking view or an asset management view or an insurance view, but we're providing a holistic Sharia-compliant financial services view. And for me, I think that's, as part of the education, what the consumer now starts to see is that he sees a congruent Sharia-compliant model across all of his financial needs. And we're starting to show up more as an industry. And yes, we will compete as our individual firms, but for the benefit of the consumer, we're starting to show up as a congruent industry.
And that's where I want to come and bring you into the Shabir. Amin mentioned it right over there, the importance of there not being the competitiveness, but a togetherness as an industry within Islamic financial education, and showing that to the public that together we can assist in making sure that when that education is delivered to the consumer, it's delivered in a togetherness, but also in a way they, as the consumer, can take it and say, I can trust this institution to handle my money.
Plus, I think the point it raised is very valid. Initially, the institution that I'm involved in was the only Islamic player in the country for a number of years. When other players came into the market with Islamic windows, and some of my colleagues that are sitting in the studio, initially there was an element of mistrust, an element of competition, an element of, okay, what is the objective? But I think over a period of time, this has matured on the basis that there's more collaboration, there's more partnership. I can tell you right now that we've achieved more since we went across and started collaborating with each other, going to the regulators together, addressing issues on a common basis, putting our joint resources, sitting around the table on a quarterly basis at the Banking Association, the Islamic Subcommittee. And the sole objective is, how do we grow this industry? How do we go across and make inroads instead of doing things separately, going across and doing things together? So I think when you talk about the element of trust, it's very evident in the way that we are working together, And inshallah, I think because of that, this industry is going to be growing quite significantly going forward.
After the break, we continue the conversation with the four heads of the Islamic banking groups here in South Africa. Do stay tuned to Hilaal Live. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back. This is a special edition of Hilaal Live. We say Jazakallah to you for joining us. Shane, I want to come to you. Shabir left off with regards to the total size of the industry. It keeps on growing, it doesn't it? And alhamdulillah, the size and the stature of Islamic banking can only grow from here.
Definitely. So I think one of the outcomes from the conference was to see as a collective, how do we grow the industry? Amin spoke about the organization formed with the pure objective of growing the industry. If we look at Islamic banking currently, our total deposits across the banks sits at around 61 billion rands. If I look at that, over the past 2 years, a growth rate of 40%. So what it shows is that over just a 2-year period, there was phenomenal growth. The growth, in fact, outstripped the growth in deposits on the conventional banking sector. There's various reasons for that. Perhaps it's more Muslims starting to take up an Islamic product, or maybe the rates that are on offer on the deposit side are slightly better for various reasons. We look at on the asset side as well, so that would be the typical finance that we do across various asset classes. That has also grown by about 28% year on year. So if you look at both sides of the balance sheet, we've experienced phenomenal growth in the sector as a whole.
Alhamdulillah. Aman, I want to take what Shaheen said right over there, getting more Muslim consumers to buy into the products of the various banks for Islamic banking. What would a consumer, if a consumer comes to you and says, Mr. Aman Muhammad, I would like to come to so-and-so bank and I'd like to obviously be part of the Islamic banking family, what would they get out of the interest-based program that they're going to be part of?
So I think what's of critical importance to understand are not just the apparent product benefits that a person gets, but us as a collective industry body. And I think coming also back to the conference that we're holding tomorrow is the work that goes on in the scenes in the background. So I like to call it, it's the kind of thing that the customer will experience but never see. So for example, one of the key elements is the equalization or leveling of the playing field from a taxation perspective. All of this doesn't just happen. There's a lot of hard work that goes into actually lobbying government, to talking to the different authorities, your SARS, the Reserve Bank, National Treasury, so they can get a better understanding of what we're offering. So in the phrase that I kicked off with, in order to create a credible alternate, we have to live what the attributes of a credible alternate would be. So coming to your question, when a customer feels that they're at a point where they would like to make a change across to Islamic, and without talking to any specific bank, what we need to deliver as an industry is that if the customer is a business person, he's able to flawlessly and seamlessly continue his business. If the person is a salary earner, they should find a credible means in which they can receive their salary, save money, settle debt, finance vehicles, homes, houses, and continue in a fashion that actually befits the lifestyle, but all at the same time recognizing and conforming to the tenets of their faith. So, in short, to answer your question, we need, as Islamic bankers, first and foremost to meet all the requirements that a normal, conventional South African bank would have to meet. And then thereafter, we have this layer of Sharia compliance that is exceptionally important for all of us, the three of us in studio and Shabir on air. What we need to understand is that when we deliver a product to a customer and we make a claim that we are delivering something that is Sharia compliant, we need to ensure, and the element that we talk about here is market conduct, that we respect the elements of market conduct. We subscribe not only to conventional regulation, supervision, but also the element of Sharia compliance, which is at the heart of everything that all of us do. So for us, when a customer or any individual wants to make the switch across into what our industry offers, we need to ensure that we deliver on a robust proposition that will allow the lifestyle to continue, all at the same time being Sharia compliant.
To that, what Aman mentioned, I mean, about the tenets of your faith. And the consumer coming to you and saying the difference between Islamic and conventional banking, because we are currently now in a situation where we've got a Muslim customer who has conventional banking, but is sort of like, I won't say afraid, but he's on tenterhooks with regards to whether he must join Islamic banking. What is the responsibility of you as the banker and the responsibility the consumer needs to play in order to meet halfway so that that consumer can make that shift to the Islamic banking system?
For us, it's an interesting discussion. You know, in any consumer product that you're selling, it's the demand side and the supply side. And how much do you follow, in economic terms, do you follow Say's law? Say's law says no, supply would create its own demand. Yes. Or do you follow Adam Smith's capitalist view to say no, there's a hidden hand of the market and the market would define its own equilibrium of prices in terms of supply and demand? There's no right or wrong answer. What we follow is the Quran, because that is our guiding light, right? And I think on both sides, as Aman pointed out, the Quran is the guiding light on the supply side, is we ensure that everything we do follows the highest levels of Sharia governance in terms of the highest standards of global governance. And people forget that we're not operating in some vacuum here in South Africa and defining our own parameters. We follow global standard. You've got global standard setting bodies from IOFI in the Middle East to Bank Negara in Malaysia, the Islamic capital markets. So we've got proper regulators that span the entire world, and we adopt this from the supply side. From the demand side, you know, some people may say that I'm not dangling a carrot, but I'm going down the route of a stick. But the Quran is very clear, and sometimes we often hear the consumers, this thing is the same as conventional banking, you're just calling it profit, but it's interest. The Quran is very clear, and we know this, and as much as we want to pass the onus on to other people, we are the custodians as individuals of our own deen, and we are answerable for our own deen. And every one of us know that riba is haram. Yes. Every one of us knows that riba is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declares war against that person that is involved in the riba. And amazingly, in the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah actually saw to today, and he actually used the exact words that our consumers use today. He says, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا الْبَيْعُ مِثْلُ الرِّبَى. They will be those people that say that riba is the same as trading. وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. But Allah has permitted trading and He has forbidden riba. So look at the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He actually used the exact words that our consumers are using today. No, I'm apprehensive because this thing is the same thing. I don't know if it's halal, I don't know if it's haram. It looks like the same thing. And yet Allah says, no, this is halal, but although it looks the same, it's halal, so consume it. So I think from the demand side or the consumer side, the answer for me is over and above everything that we've already discussed. Yes, you're getting the latest tech, you're getting a robust and comprehensive product and all of that. Ultimately, what you are receiving is getting out of war with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what you're getting. Yes. And what do you place a price on that? You can't actually quantify that in product terms. That's now between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Shabir, before we go to the break, obviously Al Barakah Bank being the first institution of Islamic banking, and unlike our three guests over here, who of course came from the conventional side of things, the consistent sustaining of customer base within Al Barakah Bank, how has that gone? Because obviously to make sure that the customer not only trusts the product on a long-term basis, but is also able to have that faith that Al Barakah Bank can carry me through whatever investment that I am doing. How is Al Baraka Bank as an institution able to go ahead and make that happen? And that has transcended into the entire Islamic banking system within South Africa.
For us, it's very interesting, right? When the bank was established, as I indicated earlier, it was the only bank. And I think there was a degree of complacency, there was a degree of, we had to come across to Al Baraka Bank. I think that the growth in the bank took place when the other players came into the market. When they came into the market, they created a greater awareness, also made Al Baraka Bank just sit up and become a bit more sharper in terms and competitive in what it did. And I think very importantly for me, with the other players coming to the market, has resulted in more changes at the bank that has taken place. And if you're talking about consistency and making sure customers stay behind, I think it's been very successful to date. Yes, people sometimes they outgrow the institution. They have to go to other institutions that offer probably higher facilities, more products, etc. But the core of our customers, the people that we service, have stayed with us. And I think it's a very important aspect that once you establish that relationship, you have to continuously innovate. And there's a number of areas where we've innovated over the period. And I think although there's players which are much bigger than Al Baraka Bank, we have managed to catch up in certain areas, and in certain areas even exceeding what the other institutions are doing. But all of this is very healthy for the industry, because what it does, it's giving consumers choice. It's giving people the ability to choose. And in this way, I do believe it's healthy for the industry to grow quite significantly.
Stay tuned to Hilaal Live. We'll be back after the break to continue this conversation. Welcome back to Hilaal Live. Shaheen, whether it's a window bank that all three of you gentlemen represent, or a standalone bank like what Shabir obviously represents, there's no compromise when it comes to obviously South African law and that added layer of Sharia. Just talk to us about that in terms of its governance and the importance of it.
For us, it's spot on. So if you look at a standalone operating model, or as you pointed out, an Islamic banking operating model, there's strict adherence to risk, compliance, and governance relating to the segregation of funds, as well as adherence to the Sharia principles. Now, if you look at some of the governance with regards to Sharia, there's various layers within organizations in terms of how do we adhere to the Sharia principles. So firstly, we all operate with an internal Sharia structure. So these are scholars that are employed by the banks to make sure that on a daily basis, they are integrally involved with the operations of the bank. They would then guide us in terms of product development, in terms of specific operations, in terms of how the sequence of events when it comes to selling a product and signing contracts, etc. Over and above that, there would be a Sharia supervisory committee or advisory committee. So these are a group of independent scholars that would independently verify and approve the products that we're selling from a banking point of view. These scholars are obviously thorough and have a good understanding with regards to fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, but because of the segregation of duties in the form of independence between the internal scholars as well as the external scholars, we ensure that there's robust adherence to Sharia compliancy within the banking system.
The added layers, Aman, I want you to talk to us and the rest of the viewers that are watching. What other added layers are there? Because governance goes so deep and so thorough in terms of Islamic banking.
For us, I think this discussion would not be possible had it not been for the robust banking system that we have in South Africa. South Africa punches way beyond its weight category when it comes to banking. And I'm talking about the first world countries like the US and Europe. And by virtue of having to comply with South African banking regulation, you know, whether you're an Islamic institute or not, we are bound by the rules and the banking laws of South Africa, first and foremost. Thereafter, in order to make the claim that we offer Sharia compliant products and services, that's where this added layer comes in. So I think what we have to take into account for the people sitting and watching us this evening is that if you are operating as an Islamic banking window or a standalone Islamic bank, you first and foremost have to comply with everything else that a conventional bank has to comply with. Thereafter, there's this added layer of the Sharia governance. Now, Shaheen touched on quite a few important points when it comes to the actual certification and Sharia compliance of what is expected of the institution. However, what has been critically important of late is this element which we refer to as market conduct. Now, market conduct is specifically important for the industry that we represent, and Amin earlier spoke about the Association of Islamic Financial Services Providers. It is what we present to potential customers in terms of what we promise in terms of delivery. Now, in order to make the promise that I can finance your home or I can receive an investment so I can invest it for you at a superior rate, there's a contract, there's a promise that we as an institution make to the customer. On top of that, we make a promise that this will be conducted in a Sharia compliant way. Now, along with all of these promises and these contracts, there are many layers of very important and strict, robust governance that needs to be in place. So when we do this, these are not false claims. These are not claims that are taken lightly by any stretch of the imagination. And these elements of Sharia governance that are basically infused into everything that we do, whether it's the terms and conditions that you're reading, whether it is an interaction that you're having with a banking official, they have to have that layer of Sharia compliance that accompanies whatever we do. So whether you're looking at it from an institutional level, where the executive of the bank, the guys who develop the product, the guys who sell you the product, right? Or whether it is from a regulatory or a supervisory perspective, the institution needs to respect that. And I think most important in the discussion that we're having now is the focus on the customer. So there's a two-way thing here, is that there's an expectation from a customer and there's an obligation from the financial institution to deliver. And I think for us, it's that critical balance, it's a delicate measure where we actually bring the two together. So for me, that's what personifies this Sharia governance that we talk about.
I mean, governance does not only mean that obviously you as the head of Islamic banking institutions sit together and of course decide on matters, but it also involves external factors. And these external factors, of course, have the various other financial institutions that would come in and want to discuss a way forward with regards to finance and banking within South Africa. So how important is that conversation with these external stakeholders in making sure that Islamic banking is headed in that direction, the direction that we as Muslims would like to see it go to?
Fahraaz, that's where the organizations and lobbying bodies that we're all part of really come into play. And I think it would be remiss of us as an industry if we don't say thank you to the South African government, the Revenue Authority, the legislator, the Banking Association of South Africa, ASISA, and all of the relevant regulatory and prudential authorities that govern us as an industry. I think if you take how the industry has developed over the past 34 years, one of the biggest players in the market in terms of lobbying has been the Banking Association of South Africa. And that's where we saw the biggest legislative amendments that came through in 2010, where we saw amendments to the Income Tax Act, the VAT Act, the Transfer Duty Act. There was then, in 2014, FSCA then amended some of their regulations. They issued out Notice 90 of 2014 that started to give the asset managers the ability to transact on money market and liquidity management solutions. So I think when it comes to broader industry players, we have made significant strides. Aman touched on the tax parity that we now have. Where we are as an industry, I think like everything, the jurisprudence needs to mature. Like even in Islamic jurisprudence, our jurisprudence matures over time. based on the context and how society is evolving, we see that new fatwa come out and on a continuous basis addressing the new requirements. And like that, the Sharia compliant industry is growing at a rapid pace. There's a maturation that we are now reaching that is necessitating legislative amendments. So where we are as an industry, and you'll see it touched on in the conference tomorrow, is we've identified almost 27 pieces of legislation that now needs amending based on all of the intra-legislative definitions. So we've already engaged, and again, we have to say thank you. You know, we're saying it's 61 billion, and that's a noticeable, sizable number against an industry of 5 trillion. We just about a percentage point. So we say thank you to them for actually giving us an ear and allowing us to practice the freedom of our religion. So those industry players, these key industry players, and they will be invited, have been invited to the industry tomorrow. You've got FSCA, our Financial Sector Conduct Authority. You've got the Prudential Authority, which is handles all prudential requirements. We then have the legislator, which is essentially the lawmakers, who writes the laws. We've got National Treasury, and we've got the Revenue Authority, which is SARS. And I think between these 5 bodies, we coordinate an industry response between BASA, ASISA, and now in recent times, the Association of Islamic Financial Services Providers.
Shabir, the customer, and I think all 5 of us here can agree, the customer is not a stupid person. The customer knows what they're buying into. With all the legislative works that we have within banking in South Africa, how important is it to make sure that, and I'm going to talk of a Muslim customer, that we keep the trust of a Muslim customer there? But most importantly, the Islamic banking institutions can also look to bringing a non-Muslim customer, and that very same non-Muslim customer can say, hey, look, this is a banking institution that can offer me what a conventional bank has, but maybe even more than I could ever dream of.
I think it's important when you're looking at Islamic banking, we're using the term Islamic banking, but it's actually ethical banking. I think I would rather, if we go across and if we have to relabel this industry, it's actually ethical banking. When you have a look at the customer is a cornerstone, I think as you mentioned, it's quite important. But when you're going to the general public, what you got to go and sell, or what you have to inform them or educate them, is some of the moral stance that we take, or we take the ethical finance that we do, which industries we involved in, which industries we do not involved in. You'll be surprised at the number of people that can identify with what Islamic banking is doing. They may not call it Islamic banking, but they can identify with the aims and objectives. And I think in this regard, I mean, if you have a look at something like the National Credit Act, came into operation, I think in 2007 or 2008, where it indicated that people must not be over indebted. They must spend what they can afford. They mustn't go and borrow more. Islamic banking was all about that, is to ensure that people do not take on more debt than they can afford. And if you have a look at that and you try to put that into context and explain that to some of the customers who are not of the Islamic faith, they actually sit back and they're quite surprised. For example, the type of financing that Islamic banks or Islamic windows do is not consumption finance. You can't go and have an overdraft. You can't take a micro loan in the conventional sense. All of these ills are very welcome by people who have experienced problems with things like overdraft and microfinance at exorbitant rates. And tomorrow's conference, one of the topics is financial inclusion, the unbanked community, and microfinance. And that's going to be a very interesting area for Islamic banking to probably experiment with. So I think it's an interesting field. It is a growth field. The growth is going to come from the Muslim community, because I don't think we've saturated that market. But more importantly, it's also to go to other communities and inform them exactly what ethical banking is all about.
Stay tuned to Hilaal Live. We'll be back after the break to wrap up this conversation on Islamic banking and the new frontiers it continues to push. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Hilaal Live. Shabir, I want to come to you. The trajectory of the customer, and of course, them slowly, and we're not just talking of the Muslim customer, we're talking of the non-Muslim customer slowly getting in to the Islamic financial system, but also the direction that Islamic banking is heading at. Where do you see it right now, and where do you see it happening in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think someone recognized the fact that the government has done quite a lot, but I do believe they need to do much more, especially as a standalone Islamic institution. Legislation doesn't favor us at this stage. When you have a look at the issue of investing in treasury bills, there's no alternative. There's no Islamic sukuk on a domestic Islamic sukuk. We've been asking the regulatory authorities to address this for a number of years without too much of success, but I do believe there's something in the pipeline. But what's quite interesting is recently we've been asked by the International Monetary Fund. They are conducting a survey of Islamic banking and Sharia compliance in Southern Africa because they feel that it's not adequately understood. They don't understand the risks. And for me, I think that's quite interesting because they want to see it growing in this region. It's got benefits. So I think there is going to be a major shift towards ensuring legislation is friendly for growing Islamic banking. From a legal perspective, we're quite encouraged by recent cases where people question the legitimacy of Islamic banking products. And we've seen that this has been on the sides of Islamic institutions, even as early as the last 2 or 3 weeks when a judgment came out, supporting Islamic banking products. So I think that's all encouraging, is going in the right direction. And I'm looking forward to the growth that's going to come through.
Shane, your answer to that?
So I want to maybe just focus on the customer point of view. So why do we do what we do? So we're passionate about this alternative form of banking. So as customers start demanding Sharia compliant product, they also demand to have a product set that's aligned to the conventional counterpart. So within each of our respective banks, we make sure that we look at a customer's personal needs, we look at their business needs. And as Amin mentioned up front, we don't operate in a vacuum. So your business has specific requirements in terms of, let's call it finance or a transact account, whatever the case may be. What we are responsible to do is make sure that we overlay the Sharia governance, make sure that our product features and attributes are compatible to the conventional counterpart. And as customers start taking up Islamic banking products, the demands increase as well because the need for more sophisticated products continues to increase. And it keeps us on our toes and make sure that we are also able to develop as an industry, develop internally as a bank, bring out more product. And if you ask with regards to the trajectory, I think more of the sophisticated capital type of structures, that's the areas that we need to start working on. Shabir spoke about a sukuk as an example. That's all in the capital space. So we've solved largely for retail customers, for business customers, but what is next for Islamic banking is probably the more bespoke type of transactions that's happening globally that we need to start introducing in South Africa as well.
Your answer to that, Ahmad?
Yeah, I think sticking with the theme of customer, but also incorporating the sophistication or the general sophistication that we see. And also when you look at your typical average Muslim customer and across the board, you find that access to electronic devices is significantly growing across the board. So as much as the element of Sharia compliance is important, but accessibility to your funds is equally important as well, or the ability to make a payment when you need to do it. It doesn't confine to banking hours. So what I find happening is that the industry is fast moving into adopting the digital space. The Islamic banking and Islamic financial services industry is quickly adopting and learning from what the conventional base requires. I can't, keep on pushing the point that Shaheen made about the fact that we don't live in a vacuum. We interact, we transact, we do business. We need a system that is compatible, that works. And I think the elements of digitization, automation are actually very important right now within this industry that we operate in. And at the end of it all, I think the trajectory in terms of where we're going is to understand what the customer requires. There's only so much institutions can force, but at the end of the day, it's taking into account what the customer requires.
Amin, your answer to that?
Thanks, Fahraaz. Echoing the sentiments of my colleagues, I think Sharia banking aside, the general consumer across the board, we're seeing a fundamental shift in consumer behavior in terms of financial services and how they're consuming products. You're seeing an augmentation of delivery channels in terms of the product. And I think where we need to become better as an industry is historically we have been knee-jerk in our reaction to the market. We said, we need a Sharia-compliant check account, we need a Sharia-compliant this. And that knee-jerk reaction, alhamdulillah, has brought us to where we are now. But I think the next frontier of Islamic financial services, as far as my view is, will rely heavily on our ability to innovate product and service that is not knee-jerk in nature, but actually frontier in nature that the conventional bank can consume. So currently we adopt or take on product constructs that fit conventional banking looks and feels. So for example, a check account is a check account and we make it a Sharia compliant one. We utilize the technology stacks that our conventional bank utilizes. For me, my vision for us as an industry is for us to become the pioneers of financial services across the board, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. Gentlemen, I'm going to give you 2 minutes each just for closing remarks. I'm going to start off with you, Shabir. Shabir, your closing remarks. And as something interesting what Amin mentioned, it's not every day you find, the four heads of the Islamic banking groups coming together and speaking on a platform like this. But when you walk out of tomorrow's conference, what is the aim from a united front, from an industry front, that you can say we've achieved something from speaking at this conference, and now we need to take the next level in achieving even more to make sure that this financial service can be trusted, not only for the Muslims of South Africa, but also for the entire nation as a whole?
I think attending one of the previous conferences, we came across the number that the industry, that's the financial services industry, not just the banking side, is about 100 billion. That's including banks, unit trust, and some of the other regulated industries as such. We set a target of saying, how can we take that to 200 billion? We're working towards that. We've created the Association of Islamic Financial Service Providers to look at that. But I think importantly, I would want the regulators to come on board to assist us in our journey to make it easier for the products that we are selling or distributing to achieve or to be consistent with the conventional products in certain ways, because at the moment there is some disadvantages. So that would be the first objective, and I think the second objective is to see how we can significantly increase our market share. The 1% on the banking side that we are currently, we need to kind of set some ambitious targets to go to 2% or 3%. And I believe that's possible. With the interest of Islamic banking, with the interest that we're finding across the board, especially with the younger generation that's coming across, it doesn't become very difficult to market the products because people are aware of the benefits. And inshallah, I think that's the direction that we want to move towards coming out of the conference. And the third issue for me is to continue working on a collaborative basis. I think this partnership that we've established through the Banking Association, the subcommittee has benefited us significantly, and we want to make sure that that continues going forward.
Shane, your closing remarks, and just what would you like to take out of tomorrow's conference when you walk out of that door?
So for us, I think my closing remarks is that as an industry, we have a credible alternative to conventional banking. Amin articulated a bit earlier the responsibility to conform with Islamic principles when dealing with your finances. We've articulated the Sharia and the governance that goes within in the Islamic banking industry. So I suppose my key takeaway point is that we now have a credible product that is competitive, that is aligned in terms of the conventional counterpart and benefits the Muslim consumer. So there's key attributes, key value adds to that product. So what I'd like to take out of the conference is just reiterate the message that we are not in the infancy any longer. We have a full suite of products available to a Muslim customer. And now it's as much as our responsibility, but the responsibility of a customer as well to inquire about the Islamic alternative.
Aman?
I like to just look at it slightly differently, given the general level of sophistication that we've seen transpire across the last 34 years within this industry, clearly makes us the gateway into Africa. Yes. Africa, on a continent where you've got nearly a population of 1 billion people, 500 million are adherents of the Islamic faith. I think with all the successes that we've seen, with the ability to have issued a sovereign dollar-based sukuk in 2014, I think with more to come, with very positive legislative changes within all the different areas that we've discussed this evening. Given the organization that I represent and also my colleagues on either side of me, we've got operations in other parts of Africa. I think it becomes an imperative that we share our knowledge and our successes with our African neighbors. And I think this will secure our status as the gateway into Africa for Islamic finance. And I think one of the things that I'd like to see happening successively with these conferences that we have is that we don't have to continually looking at the Middle East and the South China Seas regions as leaders in Islamic finance. I think we've got our own African flavor to it, and I think we're doing a damn good job.
Amin, I'm going to get you to have the final say.
Fahraaz, Jazakallah khair. Thanks to Hilaal for allowing us the opportunity to be here. I think my takeout for tomorrow, inshallah, one of the key objectives is we understood where we were 2 years ago as an industry. It will be great for us to understand where we are as an industry tomorrow. And I think contextualizing where we are as a market and understanding the work that we need to do to take it to the heights that my colleagues have spoken about, I think is crafting that clear plan. You know, if you don't have a plan, you'll never succeed in anything. So for me, I think tomorrow, and I think it will be broadcasted live on Hilaal tomorrow. So we're going to ask our viewers to please tune in and see the proceedings of the day, learn about Islamic banking, the different dynamics of it. Our intention is for consumer education, and this is one of the ways in which we hope to do that. And inshallah, we'll chart the path to what Shabir mentioned in terms of the growth of the industry, inshallah.
That's all we have for you on Hilaal Live. Shabir, I'd like to say Jazakallah to you for joining us and all the best. Well, I've just lost Shabir there. He's just logged off. But Shaheen, Aman, Amin, we'd like to say Jazakallah to you for joining us here on Hilaal Live, and all the best ahead of tomorrow's conference. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it a successful one, and may you come out united and even more successful in the good work that you guys are doing.
Ameen.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That's all we have for you on Hilaal Live. I'd just like to thank my guest again, Shabir Chauhan from Al Baraka Bank, Mohammed Amin Hassan from Standard Bank, Shaheen Suleiman from Absa Islamic Banking, and Aman Mohammed from FNB Islamic Banking for joining us here on the special edition here on Hilaal Live. And inshallah, tomorrow we will return to regular programming with your news, finance, sports, and of course, various interviews we will be having on Hilaal Live. From myself, Fahraaz Patel, and the rest of the team here in the Johannesburg studio, we say Jazakallah to you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.